Hi there, it's Angie Bird. Welcome to the Midlife Magic and Mayhem podcast. Listening to each other's stories is one of the most impactful ways to learn. And this week's guest on the podcast is Jen Berlingo, and she has a really powerful story of reframing midlife from the conditioned idea of crisis or emergency to one of emergence. Jen is an author, midlife coach, licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado, a nationally registered art therapist, and a master level Reiki practitioner. After 2 decades of midwifing hundreds of women through life's major transitions and experiencing her own passage through a fiery midlife portal, she was inspired to write her book, Midlife Emergence, to accompany other women in traversing their midlife journeys. Jen is also a visual artist who creates custom pieces for collectors worldwide and exhibits her fluid, abstract art locally in her beloved town of Boulder, Colorado. There, among the sunny foothills, Jen can be found making bottomless bowls of popcorn and snuggling on the couch with her unconventional family, her coven of close friends, and her Norwegian forest tabby rescues, Jinx and Juju. Please enjoy this delightful conversation with Jen Berlingo. Hello, Jen. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for being here and welcome to Midlife Magic and Mayhem.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Absolutely. You have a really fascinating story. I know your work centers around midlife, and as I understand it, particularly women in this stage of life. And so I'd love to know how you came to be where you are and share with us parts of your story that are relevant and that you're willing to share. And I'd love to hear and understand how you got to be where you are.
Sure. Thanks. Well, I am professionally, I'm a midlife coach and a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. I'm a nationally registered art therapist, a Reiki master, visual artist, and I'm an author and a teacher on what I like to call the midlife emergence. And I'll talk about that in a minute, my reframing of midlife crisis. Personally, I'm a recently divorced 47-year-old queer mom to a non-binary teenager. I'm living in Boulder, Colorado, full-time with my 2 kitties and half-time with my kid and about half-time with my girlfriend being here. Yeah, that's a little bit about my life. And yeah, I guess a bit about, I'll just go back to reframing like the midlife crisis time as a midlife emergence. A lot of times, midlife crisis is sort of a male centric term, and the concept of emergence really felt resonant to me. That word actually means the process of coming into view or becoming exposed after being previously concealed. And I feel like it's a play on words because midlife doesn't have to be a crisis or an emergency. It feels like an emergence or an unveiling of what has previously been unseen in us in the first half of our life. And I feel like it, really brings us more fully into our authenticity if we accept the invitation for it to do that. In midlife, the way that the way in psychology it's defined is the period between like 40 to 65. And the 40s, I have noticed as like the decade of coming into it is sort of this liminal space or this portal between the first and second act of life. And it's like this waiting room where we have this opportunity to architect the second half of life the way we want it to be. So, yeah. And I had this like inkling around my 41st birthday that I was craving more. It really felt like I was stepping into this different version of myself. I was craving more grit and depth and passion and truth. And I was feeling really dissatisfied, but I didn't really know at the time what it was that I wanted. And I write about this in the opening of my book, Midlife Emergence, that's now out. But it's, a few months after my 41st birthday, there was this morning where it like all broke loose inside of me. And I was driving to a beach in this little ocean town called Half Moon Bay. I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And I was basically in pajamas from the night before and with bare feet. And I got in the car and this Ani DeFranco song came on and it just hit different. And I was able to admit to myself in that really tearful drive a truth that had been brewing beneath the surface in me for a long time. And I knew it would shake a foundation that I had built for my life. And it was something that I mean, I feel like in midlife, we have this opportunity to change, but it's also like the stakes are pretty high at that time because we're pretty settled into the lives that we've really carefully built, perhaps marriages, mortgages, kids, careers. And I had a really good life, was married to my best friend, Craig I had been with him for about 20 years at that point almost. Or no, I guess less at that point. And we had a child and, I had my private psychotherapy practice and I still, was sort of feeling shame that I felt like I wanted more. So I went on this quest to figure out exactly what my personal more looked like. Yeah, it really felt like something I had been guiding clients through for a long time at that point in therapy and in coaching, just guiding them through life transitions. And then I started to really experience my own really transformative passage there. And it really inspired me to start writing about it. Yeah, I could say more. I'm not sure, but
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, there's so many things that hit to me personally and to the women that I speak to as well around this time of life about one, there's some shame around feeling like I want more when everything looks like on paper that I have a great life. Like, who am I to want more? Why am I feeling like there's something brewing? There's something, and I think you spoke about it almost like molten lava, like it's
yes.
like there's this fire inside that's like wanting to come out, but yet I don't know what to do about it. Right. So as a professional and as someone who is and was working with people through life transitions, what did that look like for you? Like for your practice and your knowledge and expertise, how did that translate to you for your personal life in discerning what was actually going on and what to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, I had been, guiding women through these sorts of passages, like I said, for a long time. And it felt like feeling that in me, this like hot, burning sort of feeling in me that was coming up, really made me want to pause. At the time, actually, I was in a position to pause my practice. I had some clients moving and it just felt like a natural time and really go inside and figure out what it is that I was seeking. And at the time, it really allowed me to start to live more fully into my queerness and into other more what might be seen as subversive aspects of myself. And I wanted to capture it in a way to help kind of midwife other women through their own unique midlife passages. And by midwife, I mean, it's sort of like a rebirth, So it's like I could see that happening, and the professional part of me really wanted to kind of mark these things and reveal the true story of how I was doing it in a really messy way, and just be super real about my experience of it. Even though it's different for everyone, and midlife is definitely not a linear process. I wanted to pinpoint some of the universal themes and signposts along the way, and those became actually like the 13 chapters of my book. But I just felt like truth telling and feel like truth telling is really vital to having deeper connections and to our collective healing. And I want to be someone in the world who is part of this change where we're telling our radical, messy truths to each other and not just like, sugarcoating it for social media or whatever. And yeah, I have this quote in the beginning of my book by Lizzie Ruzinko that says, I have it on my wall here. It says, "The story you're ashamed to tell is the one that will set you free." And I feel like when we're talking about what we've been shamed for, it helps to validate that in others in some way. It helps to have that deeper connection. And I feel like I hope that by standing in my own truth and speaking it, however painful it is at times, it would inspire other people to claim their own. And and to speak their own as well. Most of my clients, like myself, are recovering good girls or people pleasers. And, who've done all the right things and met the expectations to create some life that we like should want or we've been taught to want, but still sometimes feel unsatisfied in that. So it was sort of my mission to be someone who could be a cheerleader for helping women to unfurl more into their more aligned ways of being in the world. Because I know for myself too, it's like, it's really tempting to stay in this safe, sort of sleepy, stagnant homeostasis or habit, because it's really difficult to face that voice inside that's saying like, is this all there is? Or now what? Yeah, because that could change everything. And it did for me in a lot of ways that have been really growth producing, but that have brought a lot of grief and a lot of joy to my life.
Yeah. You said a couple of things. One about this midlife being kind of a rebirthing process. And
Yeah.
it does feel like that. I mean, it feels like the word threshold and the concept of threshold has become very much in the forefront for me in the
Mm-hmm.
past year-ish, really of being in Boulder. And it feels like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's a place to walk through, and it can be messy, and it feels like a birthing process. And
Mm-hmm.
it truly is, like, the way I'm viewing it and the way I've experienced it, and then like speaking with women like yourself, it is this kind of third phase. It's you, a young girl, and then you have the threshold and the transition of puberty, and then you have the hormonal cycles of being in that phase of life and having to conform, being the good girl. I'm definitely squarely in the good girl category myself,
Mm-hmm.
and know what that feels like. And,
Me too.
don't rock the boat. Let everything just like, oh no, everything's fine. Look how flexible I am. I can do anything. Like, oh wow.
Right.
And so I'm so curious, like, you're speaking to, making these big transitions can be
Mm-hmm.
very challenging, and really, and it looks different for everyone, right?
It does.
It
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, everyone's process is different. There is no prescription. Everyone's is different. And there is an element of courage, I think, of walking this path, not knowing what the what's at the what's out there. It's kind of the uncertainty. Like, I have to walk down this path, and I really kind of don't know where it's going, even if you have an inkling. So where for you, what did that process look like? Where did the courage come from?
That's a really good question. It took years, really. It was a slow change, and a slow building of the courage to actually trust fall into the unknown and to make friends with and welcome the mystery of what was on the other side. I just spoke about like the safety and security piece that I feel like during midlife, we walk this continuum between what's safe and familiar, the life we created, and then what's alluring and novel and new and growth producing. And I mean, it's natural for us all to crave the safety. It soothes our nervous systems. You know, I feel like in doing like qualitative research for my book and just with the women that I've worked with, in talking with them, more of them, actually all of them, not just more of them, all of them said they were more enticed by risk at this phase of life than they were at any other time. And it's like this actually developmental challenge of this time of life. Eric Erickson, a developmental psychologist, called this generativity versus stagnation. So it's like moving toward the generativity. And what you just said about, going through adolescence and then, these different markers of change and transition, these thresholds we cross. Um, the midlife one is really about what Carl Jung calls the individuation process. We go through the first pass at individuation as teenagers, where we individuate or separate our self and our identity from that of our parents. But the one in midlife is about separating from and differentiating from the social, cultural, and familial norms, and really trying to find, instead of all the shoulds and all of the social expectations, what is actually true for us. So it is this pull that actually happens in midlife. So there is a courage in being able to follow that versus like putting it all away, stuffing it down and saying, no, actually this is good enough. And this is okay. And for a lot of people, it is okay. And it can be, it's not like you have to jump off this cliff and make this giant change. And some people don't have the privilege to do that in a lot of ways, but, there is this internal call, that happens, and it does take, some fortitude to follow that, and really just take a risk on not knowing what's going to be on the other side of that. I call it like a tightrope in the book of like, it's kind of like walking across from this safe platform to like something in the fog over there. And we don't know what it's going to look like on the other side, but maybe just trust that we can be held and we can hold ourselves, in it.
Absolutely. And I think having support too, like having a network of support, knowing that I love that image of like walking a tightrope into the fog, like, I'm leaving this, I'm leaving the safety over here. Oh my God, where am I going? And I do, like, I feel that. I have felt that in myself. I have felt that in these conversations with other women, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Why do I want this? And you start questioning everything, because it can be difficult to welcome the mystery, as you were saying. And there is this, you also said the word allure, which I love. Like there's an allurement, like there's something pulling. And for me, allurement can often mean eros, like eros of not the twisted erotic versions that the Western culture has kind of made. And some of that's fine too, but eros meaning just life force energy. Like it's that allurement of desire and quest, and there's something different out there and I've got to know what it is and I have no idea what it is.
Right.
And that's okay. And like for me, it feels like a healthy process, even though it's really scary. It can be scary.
Yeah, it is. I think that, like I said, developmentally, it's what we're called to do, and it's hard. Pioneering is hard. Traversing a path that maybe no one's walked before, because we all have a different story and a different path. And it's usually met with some sort of judgment or projection or expectation from, internal and external, that can be difficult to surmount. And that can sometimes arrest the movement, along that path. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. And we all do it in some way.
Absolutely. I think telling these stories is so important, and hearing and thank you for being so honest and so truthful in telling your story, because as you were speaking to earlier, I do think this is so profound to hear someone else's experience and to know that we're not alone. And my experience is going to look different than yours, but it's still the same pull. It's still the same questioning. And it helps to give people courage to just maybe take one step onto the path, just one tiny little movement of like self-exploration, self-discovery, being able to communicate what we're going through. Because I think that can be part of it too. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this. What does the communication look like to the people around us? Because it can cause ripples out in our life when we are in this place of questioning.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I have a few things I want to say about what you said just now. I feel like, I think it's important to tell our stories. I think that's, the first part of what you said, and I'll get to the rippling part. But um, as a reader, I like to read books. There are like two types of books that I enjoy: a memoir and like personal growth or self-help books. Those are typically what I end up reading or listening to on Audible, honestly. And I feel like storytelling, like hearing someone else's story, reading memoirs, they're naturally instructive in a way. I learn and I heal so much from hearing other people. And yeah, it feels like this like show and don't tell sort of teaching moment to like hear from other people and other women about what they've gone through. So I wanted to write my story in a way that was really kind of raw and open and honest. And it also felt natural for me as a licensed therapist and coach and, the different types of work that I've done to weave in some didactic pieces and some self inquiry exercises. So when you were saying like taking one baby step, like I have that's sort of chapter 2 of my book, but like each chapter ends with prompts for journaling, for art making, for personal ritual and ceremony ideas on the topic or theme of that chapter so that readers can engage in all, some, none of the invitations that I offer because we all learn differently and process differently. So I wanted to like provide this buffet of ways to really dig into one's own midlife experience, even though they were reading about, my story as an example or thread through it. And yeah, what you said about like rippling out, that really feels like the why of I wrote this book. And it's funny, as it's like making its way into the world, I have these like recoil moments of contraction where I'm like, oh God, why did I write all this shit down for everyone to read? And it's scary and it feels really vulnerable. But I really hope that it inspires other people to talk about their own truth in that. And I think, yeah, the question you asked about how to navigate that, it's funny. I have like a whole chapter on that. It's called Facing Mirrors. And it's like about what we do as we're changing and transforming. And it's like we're in this formless sort of state. I mean, to use the overused metaphor of like a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis state and comes out as a butterfly. The chrysalis, you completely dissolve into, they completely dissolve into nothing, into goo, and then reform. And I feel like that happens a lot in transformation, right? We're just like goo, but we're not in this chrysalis where no one can see us. We're just walking around in the world bare, right? And so it's like everyone can see all of my awkward, messy change, and then I'm the masochist who wrote it all down and put it out into a book. But you know, that piece of it for me has felt really important to talk about. I devoted a whole chapter to it because at first I felt like weird that with all the changes going on in my life, reworking the structure of my family and my career and all different things that changed for me in the past decade or so, the thing that kept me up at night was really thinking about like fielding projections from family, from friends, from strangers, and how to do that. And gosh, there's a quote that opens chapter 11 of my book, and it's by Georgia O'Keeffe. And it says, I've already settled it for myself, so flattery and criticism go down the same drain, and I am quite free. And I love that. And I'm not there. That's like total goals, but it takes the ego out of it just to stand in the firm knowing of who you are, regardless of praise, regardless of criticism, both. Those things are truly about the other person, and they're not going to understand necessarily your past because it's not theirs. I don't know. There's not like a necessity to like justify it or over explain it. It's like, this is the truth of what I'm walking. So
that's really beautiful. And there really isn't a prescription, right? Like, even though the question might be, how do I do this? What did you do? How? Everybody's so different. And, this feels like almost the theme of the conversation is that my path is different from your path. There is no prescription, and we can learn from each other in our story. And it's more about a transference of a way of being than it is about one step, two step, do this next. And it feels like, and I'd love to hear more about the book. Like, it feels, just from what I know of the book, that that's kind of what you're doing. So you've said that there's 13 chapters and it's not necessarily prescriptive, but there are prompts.
No. Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to know more kind of about the structure of how the book is laid out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could have written an instruction manual that was like a linear how to get through midlife,
Yeah, right.
without screaming and running down the street naked with your hair on fire. But
And hey,
yeah,
that can be fun too. I mean,
that could be fun and might be a part of someone's midlife emergence. Yes.
yeah.
But it's, yeah, I can't write that book because it's not, there's no prescription. And I don't think anyone would necessarily want to read that. Yeah, just different themes that I feel like come up around, fielding projections of others, about the why you're doing it, how that ripples out to those that and who you're modeling this for, your children or your friends or your parents. For me, that was a big piece of really being my full self so that my mom could see me doing that, however that affects them or impacts them. Yeah. And then other themes that I think are really universal at this time have to do with really examining our early childhood conditioning and overturning introjects, which are basically just the messages we received really early on from our caregivers that sometimes become like our inner voice, and rewriting those for ourselves for the second act. Like some of mine, like be a good girl, or, whatever types of messages that you get when you're young and you're maybe living them, sometimes unconsciously in the first part of life. It's like, how is that serving me? And how can I re-author that going forward? So that feels like one that has been really universal to the women I've worked with, and definitely for myself, even as someone who has been a therapist for a couple decades and has been in therapy for longer than that and has done a lot of personal growth work. I found that so much more rose to the surface during this time to really be reworked again. And yeah, there are a lot of different pieces to, you spoke about Eros, and I write about that toward the end of my book, about really being your own best lover, like your lover to yourself, and what that looks like in a way that's tangible and not necessarily, oh, self-love, it's like that's thrown around to an extent. But yeah, really writing your own, I do this in the book, writing your own love language, like what it is to love yourself, like what specifically you are looking for and doing for yourself. And maybe hoping it's like writing care instructions if someone found you, like you were like how to care for you and how to do that for yourself. So yeah, there are a lot of different pieces. It goes a lot of places. But yeah, I really think that this time of individuation from social and family conditioning, like I said, and sort of this like untaming yourself, feels like a big theme. There's this quote in my book by Bethany Webster that I cite that says, for daughters growing up in a patriarchal culture, there's a sense of having to choose between being empowered and being loved. And I feel like a lot of the women who grew up in my generation and before, probably, I'm Gen X, can relate to that, because, and as adults, like we don't have to choose between being empowered and being loved anymore, even though that's like a childhood survival strategy of like not rocking the boat, keeping your caregivers comfortable because that's your survival. And breaking out of that has been both healing and painful and messy to navigate, and pick apart which pieces feel true and pure to who I am, and which are these introjects or messages that I've gotten from outside. Yeah, that part seems to be a big piece of the work that I do with my clients one-on-one in my midlife coaching practice, and in, my online programs and groups, as well as, talking about it in a really personal way in my book.
It occurs to me as an unraveling. And just like you were talking about the choice of feeling like I'm either going to be empowered or I'm going to be loved. And that's a very difficult place to put ourselves in. And we didn't put ourselves there necessarily, right? I mean, we may find ourselves there, and that might be the programming that we received, but that was not our choice. So I think that's another thing that happens at this time of life that you've spoken so beautifully to, is it feels like if I unravel some of these entanglements, that I'm going to break loose completely.
Yeah.
And and then what? It's almost like being out in space and you're tethered to the spaceship and you're the astronaut out there floating around in space. And you're like, okay, if I go do this thing over here, I might lose connection completely.
Right. Someone will cut that umbilical cord. And then what?
Yeah. They're like, no one's going to understand me. They're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to, because we have been so, for lots of different reasons, there's so much about other people in our training and in our upbringing and in our, it's just the nature of caretaking, right? And being a caretaker of people and ourselves, that it can feel like we're going to really lose everyone. Like if I find myself, then they're not going to love me.
Right. I know. And that's risky. It feels like when you're stepping beyond this boundary of, a conventional identity that your family or social group or your culture has said that you're going to be, and take this risk to truly become yourself, it feels like we're jeopardizing connection and belonging and acceptance. And we are interdependent beings. I mean, we do need connection, and it doesn't, like, growing into a different version of yourself or evolving to the next phase of yourself doesn't have to burn those bridges. It definitely feels like it will. But I feel like when women dare to live an unconventional life in some way, it brings up this, at least for me, I'll speak for me, and I know some of my friends as well, but it brings up this visceral, like, persecution fear, like witches being brought to the center of town and burned at the stake for, living in a way that isn't exactly prescribed. In the book, I do write about the witch wound a bit and about fielding projections and expectations as we go through the big transformations, and how it does activate, maybe even somewhere in our memory of our bones or in our soul, that feeling of social persecution. And the reality, even though it doesn't feel like it at the time, what I've seen in my own story and in my own life is that the more I am being myself, the more comfortable people are around me. It's not like I'm doing it to make them comfortable. I mean, it may make them uncomfortable that I'm doing weird things or living in a way they didn't know me as before. Like, oh, wait, you were this person over here, and now you're doing this totally different thing. But I think that there's, like, once I can embody or have embodied myself more fully or feel more whole in myself and can, like, take my seat in that, there's, like, an ease that comes in the field around me. And I feel like that impacts other people in a way that's like, and then kind of invites them into their own sense of self and their own, like, ease. There's, like, this magnetism with authenticity that I find alluring in other people. And I hope to be able to at least, take, like, baby steps into that and being that, which is, yeah, I think a big sign of what this midlife time is or can be if we take that opportunity.
Yeah, a couple of things just came up for me. One is education. Is there a piece of this that is educating yourself and the people around you on, this is what's happening with me. This is what I'm going through, not hiding it, whether it's physical, any emotional, mental, spiritual, any of the different ways this can be showing up, not hiding it, really speaking about it truthfully and honestly, and educating around our care instructions. I love that term. Like, writing your own care instructions. Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Right. But first we have to know what they are for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes we haven't thought about that or been invited to think about that, because as women growing up in the generation we did in this culture, we've been taught how to love, not how to be loved, and how to adore and not to be adored, how to desire and not to, how to be desired and not to desire. I might have said all of those backwards, but it's like, we haven't, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we
understand.
We know how to give care, but not necessarily what we require as care. So
receiving, I think, we don't know how to receive.
Right. Because there's, at least in my family, like, I grew up in a family that was basically like a long line on, and the women in my family were these martyrs who really were caregivers. And gave of themselves until they were empty and actually rewarded for it. It was seen as a virtue. It's like, oh, she does so much for everyone else. Isn't that amazing? And that's sort of the air I grew up breathing. And, you know, my grandmother was like that. My mom's like that. And my sister and I were taught to be that way. And I have seen the level of burnout in that and the level of invisibility in that firsthand. And I've really tried to choose a different path, even though that's going against the grain of what some of my own conditioning was. And it's sometimes met with this phrase or attitude of, oh, it must be nice to be able to fill in the blank with whatever self-care or self-inquiry work that I'm doing or growth work. And I've found that that's shifted over time in my family, where it really felt like that a lot in my 20s when I was in a graduate program for therapy. But I think now, having modeled that a little bit in my family and have talked about it and been more visible in it, and just with what the women in my family are going through in their own lives, it's like they're seeing the value of that more. And that's one of the ripples, I think. And I feel like that's really an important part. Like that's sort of the education part that you're talking about. And it goes both ways, like generationally, like forward and backwards through the lineage.
100%. And that's one of the things that some of the groups of women that I've been working with in the past year, especially, and even before that, that's one of the things that we speak to. And especially women right now in our generation, around our age, give or take, that it really feels like that's the work that we're doing. Like if we're being called into this work of true transformation, that it is healing generations in both directions. Like that's what we're being called to do. We are the ones that are being called to stop the pattern and create a new pattern. And it can feel a bit like, spontaneous combustion at times. Like you just kind of drop into a pile of ash, like, like, oh my God, I can't take this anymore. But then when we can, and I think that's where the belonging comes in. That's where support of other women who are at least even looking at the path of what we're talking about, maybe if they haven't stepped onto it yet, but there's some allurement there. There's some pull. They're reading your book. They're reading, some of the other things that I'm sure we both probably have in common. And it is important because like what you were saying before about some of the previous generations and this rewarding of giving of yourself until you're just empty. And it can actually make you sick, like physically.
It can. And
it can bring on dis-ease in your physical body because you're never replenishing yourself and it's always going out. And also thinking about it from that perspective, like if I'm going to be giving to everyone else, I mean, this is, kind of cliche too, with that whole airplane thing, like, oh, put your mask on first.
Right, the mask. Right.
But if you can like get yourself around that and back up to the seriousness and sincerity of what that means, of like, no, I need to be an advocate for the health of this system. If this system is going to go co-regulate with other systems. And that you were actually speaking to that earlier too, like now being, for anyone, when we're truly sitting in our authenticity, what that does to the people around us. Like it actually, the other thing that came up for me was like nervous system regulation. Like, and I'd love to know if you've, like how this comes into your work at all, or do you speak to that in the book at all? I haven't read that yet.
Right. Yeah. I think that the rippling out, yeah, definitely on a nervous system level and how we co-regulate and how like we are interdependent and we are affecting each other on so many levels that we can't even see or measure necessarily. And what you spoke about the dis-ease coming into the body, even when we're not living in congruence with ourselves, or when we're overextending ourselves, that's something that's definitely part of my story. And as a Reiki practitioner and someone who's studied the energetic body and the chakra system since I was a teenager. I do write about that quite a bit, and some of the different things in me that these ailments that have actually been having my whole life, like some chronic pain and a lot of different pieces that have lifted actually during this transformation time for me, which is so curious. Like I work with a functional medicine practitioner who I've had chronic knee pain for since I was like 24. And the week that I started dating my girlfriend, it stopped. And I'd been working with her and taking supplements and whatever. And I had this session with her, and she did this biofeedback analysis and said, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. It's not whatever you're doing is working better than what I'm giving you. Like, what's happening in your life? And I feel like that's definitely a part, and I don't know how to measure it. But there's definitely truth to that, and there's mystery in that. I feel like the way that we walk through the world, like the way that I was saying before about like really trying to find our seat and to stand in our truth, does radiate out on a nervous system level to the people around us, and really can allow them to find that ease, like I was saying.
Yeah. And even in your own form, like that's an incredible story that your knee pain, like the physical dis-ease, once we come into true alignment and at a frequency of what feels most natural and most loving and exciting and joyful. And I mean, I'm just imagining all the different things that could be happening in that scenario, like when you start embarking on a new journey with someone new, and when it's really in alignment, like that's healing in itself. Like whether it's supplements or not, like that's being truthful is and being able to fully enjoy. And I don't know if this is your experience or not. I'm just, again, like the way it lands in my body is having that full joyful experience and really being able to take it in and receive it and like almost let it breathe through you.
Right.
And sometimes I think when we're locked down, like we don't let it doesn't things don't happen. Like if we're always kind of in protection mode and good girl and pleasing and giving and caretaking and busy and all the things that we wear like badges, that it kind of shuts, it can, not always, but it can shut those pieces down somewhat. And we know how to look good on the outside, but it's like what's really happening there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And to to let that part of us breathe and to experience joy, I think that that's something that the eros that you spoke about, it's something that isn't necessarily taught to us or encouraged or rewarded. But when we start to be able to feel that, I had this sense of like, as my marriage was dissolving and I was stepping more fully into the wholeness of my sexuality, and starting to date a woman for the first time in my 40s, like all of that really like anchoring me more into my truth and allowing me to experience myself as more whole, felt like all of this stuff opening up, like a flow in me opening up that had been really tightly bound before, and kept in management, like managed in a certain way. And at the same time, there was grief, a lot of grief. So it's like feeling it all at the same time, like having this, a friend of mine calls it emotional pluralism. It's like holding all of the feelings at once, And so while I was experiencing this newness and fullness and joy, I was also holding this like grief and the letting go, and the letting go process is definitely a part. I think it's like, there's this quote that I don't even know who said it. I come across it in social media all the time. It like finds me on my Instagram feed, and it's like something. It's like haunting, but it's like to step in. I'm going to butcher it probably, but to step into the life you want, you have to let go of the life you had, or it's something like that. But I'm just like, oh, So it's always like this two sides of that coin of like oh gosh, the joy and the expansiveness and the growth, and then there's this like shedding. molting, letting go part that, of course, creates all kinds of other emotions, sadness and grief and whatever's there for a person.
And like you said, and all of those things are important to feel, and really allowing ourselves to feel all of it and not, shutting any of that down, which can be challenging because sometimes it just
Definitely.
doesn't feel very good.
It really is.
We're like,
Yeah, it's
make
easier
that
to
go
numb
away.
out. It's easier. Yeah.
Exactly. And then again, like circling all the way back to courage, because it is easier to numb out. And sometimes we're going to do that. There might be days where it's like, all right, Netflix it is. Like, I'm done.
Oh, for sure. I know at the end of some of my days, it's like, I'm doing that. And I'm like, okay, I just need to get under my weighted blanket, get my cat, watch some smutty TV and eat popcorn. And that's like very comforting. I think we need that too without berating ourselves for it. But it's just a way of going in and out of it, of titrating the experience of transition
Right.
into manageable bites.
If there was one theme, I mean, obviously we have the larger theme of women and midlife and all the things that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're speaking to clients and women in your communities right now, what is the kind of major theme that you are seeing or hearing? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. There's three like words that just flashed before me when you asked that feel really paramount to the work that I'm doing and what I'm hearing from others. And it's like, I'll just say the words to that: love, freedom, and integrity in all their forms. Like and talking with people who've already read my book before it's out, I can see that it has a lot of different like takeaways for different people. And it's not necessarily, it's sometimes surprising in terms of like what I intended and what the message is. But yeah, like any piece of art that you put into the world, it's not mine anymore once it's out there, and people can relate to it and take from it what they need, and they will. But yeah, when I sit with it myself, I really feel like it's about love and about freedom and about integrity. And that true love looks like freedom, looks like the freedom to be your most expansive self and to keep growing and to be new every day, and to ask others that we love, like, who are you now? And who are you now? And who are you now? Constantly, rather than holding them to this static form. I find that the freedom and flexibility in that, I feel like that's very accepting and loving. And it's like, it holds someone in the constant becoming of who they are. And the idea of like, even if you're disappointing someone else, it's best to never disappoint or override or ignore your own truth, because in the long run, living in integrity, the integrity word there, and authenticity will be the most growth producing for everyone involved, even if it's painful, even if that process is painful. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, that's
absolutely. And I've those three words are, yeah, it's just wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the question, who are you now? Because I do think we have this expectation of each other too, that we're just going to be the same forever. Like, I know you, and then I know everything about you, and then that's it, we're done. Instead of understanding that we are these very, very complex systems that change and iterate, and we physically change constantly. Our cellular structure is constantly changing. That's going to have our microbiome is changing. That's going to have effect on our brain and our thoughts. And like the weather is changing. Like literally, how can you possibly expect to be the same person every day?
Yeah, I know. And it's like, we're dynamic organisms, and it's, you think it's like, oh, this is my friend and she has this life and that is who she is to me. That's actually very tight and controlled, and like not as loving in the fullness of like, okay, this person is having a human experience and it's going to look different this year than as it did, 10 years ago when we met, or whatever that is. And I think doing that with ourselves, not holding ourselves to one form. Like, okay, I took on, this job or this relationship, or whatever hat it is or role it is or mask it is that we've been given, and then just saying like, and this is how it is, and this is who I'm going to be now, or I am an accountant for life. Like, not necessarily like I mean, I've never been an accountant, but I'm saying like, you take something on and it is okay for a time, and it might be the truth for that moment, but we are allowed to be flexible and change our minds and our hearts.
Yes. Yes. And we can change from day to day, and that's okay. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean there's something wrong. Right.
Right.
And in those words, I think you're right too about redefining what these things mean for us now, and kind of checking in occasionally and saying, what's my definition of love? What does that even mean? Like, we all kind of assume that we know what that means and what it looks like, but no, what does it mean for me? It might actually mean something different for me than it does for you. And freedom, what does that look like and feel like for me in my body right now? And this isn't for me, it doesn't occur as a selfish practice. It occurs as just getting clear,
Yeah, and
just
it's
getting
definitely
clear
not
on who you
selfish,
are.
because as we've talked about, like, the more you're living that, I think the more it benefits those around you too. So yeah, it's definitely not all self-focused or selfish sort of endeavor.
Well, Jen, this has been such a gorgeous conversation. Thank
I
you
really enjoyed
so
it.
much for your time. And you have this gorgeous book. And I also have to say that you created all the art, if I'm correct, because you're an
I
artist as
did.
well. So all of your art and everything around the book and your website and everything is all created by you, which is extraordinary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a really visual person, so that part's important to me. It's a big part of the language I use, and just how I express in the world. So I love that. Yeah, one of my paintings is on the cover of the book, and all of my marketing stuff.
Absolutely. Have you held the book up yet? Will you hold the book up? So if people are
Sure. Yeah,
watching
I
this on
have
video, then they can
an
see it,
advanced reader
see what
copy
we're talking
here. This
about.
is
Oh my God, it's gorgeous.
Thank
Yay.
you.
So yeah, and I'm going to put where everybody can find you and how to buy the book and all of those things in the
Great.
show notes. But as well, where can people find you?
Sure. My website's really the hub for all of my offerings. It's just my name, Jen Berlingo, JenBerlingo.com. My book, Midlife Emergence, is being published on April 11th, and it's available now on Amazon or wherever you like to buy your books, or you can ask your local bookstore to order it. There are lots of ways to connect with me. I offer one-to-one midlife coaching, and I'm rolling out several new programs this year around different themes that I touch on in my book. And those will be self-paced and guided, but self-paced. And then I'm offering a midlife emergence group guidance program later this year. So I have a lot of that stuff coming out. And like we spoke about, I feel like the community, whenever I do the group offerings, that is so potent and so rich when women who are sitting in this similar phase of life and all having different experiences and different facets of it can talk with each other. It facilitates so much healing and mirroring and validation and like love and acceptance of the becoming. So those are very powerful programs. Yeah, and you can always find me on social media. All of those are going to be in the show notes, but mostly I hang out on Instagram. I post there daily, different inspiration and musings, and that handle is just my name. It's Jen Berlingo, like also a visual artist, as you said, and I sell an oracle deck on Etsy called the Soul Space Oracle, and I've had that out there. It was self-published about 7 years ago, and I'm still shipping them all over the world every week, and those are fun as well. So yeah, that's different ways to get in touch. I would love to hear from you and work with any of your listeners in whatever capacity fits for them.
Amazing. Yeah, I love a good group program too. I highly recommend doing some of this deep discovery and personal growth work in groups, because it does. I mean, one-on-one work is great, and that definitely has a place for that. And there's definitely a place for group work because you do have that sense of belonging.
I agree. Yeah, so much can happen in community that, a lot happens one-on-one, but really in community, I feel like I don't know, in our culture now, women are not gathering in the way maybe that we have, in ancient, like in other times, but coming
That's a
together.
whole other conversation
It's
that
a
I would
whole
love to
other,
talk
yeah,
about.
it totally is. But I really love offering things in that way as well. So
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. It was a pleasure having you here, and I hope to see you soon.
thank you. Thanks so much, Angie. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
As always, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And did you know that I have a newsletter? Well, I do. And you can sign up at angiebird.com/subscribe, where you will get weekly notes from me, weekly summaries of the podcast, and any other events or offerings or just inspiration that I might be coming across each week. And also, please subscribe to the podcast if you have not done so, and leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help the show gain momentum and help other women like you find us and create some more magic and mayhem in their lives as well.